Hello and welcome to another episode of Shortcut, the podcast that takes you on a shortcut to developer productivity, developer experience, and product engineering. My name is Morten.
And my name is Marilag, and today we're joined by a principal engineer from Banking Circle, Juan Herreros. Juan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So we're going to have a lot of conversation around how you're doing engineering in Banking Circle, but please introduce yourself.
Yep, my name is Juan. I'm Spanish, but I have been living in Denmark for the last almost 8 years of my life now. Came here to study originally, then I was working at the Saxo Bank for a few years. And back then I was trying different things. I was trying data science, data engineering. Ultimately, I ended up doing this thing that we call DevOps engineering. Different people have different interpretations of that. Back then, it was a lot of handling infrastructure for the Kafka platform. And then eventually I moved to Banking Circle, where I've been working for the last 4 years, a bit over 4 years now. And then there I was first working in the team building the client-facing API, but also as a DevOps engineer, so mainly dealing with our infrastructure. And later we built sort of like a central DevOps team. Now we call it cloud engineering team because we've also been through a few transformations, where we are building platforms that the rest of the developers in Banking Circle can use.
Yeah, and can you explain a little bit about what type of company Banking Circle is? So it sounds like something with banking or fintech, but for those who doesn't know what Banking Circle is.
Yeah, so the main idea behind Banking Circle, the main thing that we do is payments, and specifically cross-border, cross-currency payments. That has historically been a bit of a pain because one, it takes time, and two, it's expensive. And the farther away you go, the more expensive and time-consuming it gets, right? But of course, now we have a better technology, and what we're trying to do is to have integration with lots of the clearing houses of different currencies around the world, so that through us, you can have essentially fast and cheap payments. Of course, to do that, there are different ways of doing it. Like I say, we have an API that you can use to execute the payments. We also have a UI. People can also use sort of like bulk payments through some files. There's also a lot of engineering happening at Banking Circle because of this. And of course, we're also doing the core processing of all of these payments. And we have artificial intelligence systems that also do like sanctions screening, checking for fraudulent transactions, and money laundering and all of that. So yeah, it's a very fun place to be in.
Yeah, that's interesting because a lot of our previous guests came from the enterprise world in Denmark, so they're not inherently digital companies. And this is the first digital company that we're talking with, so it's going to be interesting for our audience to hear, what is your structure? Well, how does your engineering organization look like?
Yeah. Well, we have around 250, maybe a bit more than that. I don't really have the exact number now, engineers working in Banking Circle. Of those, like I say, we work in different areas, right? We have a department which we call Technology Operations, what I'm a part of. There we have teams that are doing all things related with infrastructure, with security, networking, database administration, VMs, everything that has to do with supporting the work that others do, right? Then we have teams doing the API or the UI. We have teams that are building reporting systems, also internal systems, which kind of monitor everything else. And then you can see if the payments are working or not. We have obviously lots of integrations with different clearing houses around the world. And the interesting thing there is that all of them look different. So we also have a team that kind of has that responsibility of like talking with all of those central banks or clearing houses of those. And these are all different teams. They are, in all cases, building on the cloud. So we are a cloud-first company like that. We are using Azure in all cases. And that's the common point, so to say. Then different teams use different technologies. There's a lot of .NET development. I think there's a lot of that in Denmark and in the Nordics, generally speaking. And of course, we are in Azure. We're mostly a Microsoft customer like that. So there's a lot of .NET, but we also have people doing Java. We have people doing Python, specifically around data engineering. We have a bit of Golang, of Go around, and then of course a bit of TypeScript here and there also for the UI. So there's a lot of different things, and even in cases where two teams are using the same language, historically there has been many different ways of doing it, right? Which is fair because people have different ideas and different opinions about how to build. But then, and especially when it comes to us in the cloud engineering team, or essentially doing platform engineering, it gets tricky because suddenly you have to support all of that, right?
Yeah. What about from a product perspective? Is that product teams with product owners or separate product organization, or how does that look in Banking Circle?
So right now, the product owners are integrated in the same teams as where the developers are. We've gone through a few iterations of that, but in all cases, the product owners have always been sort of like sitting together with the developers. Of course, then they are also in the customer-facing products, right? Like the API or the UI. They also take that communication, and they have this role of sort of translating that into a backlog and then the request or the feature request for the developers. But they are joining, or in a day-to-day basis, they are part of the team in the sense that they are sitting with the developers, taking the same meetings and working very closely with them.
Yeah. So in your case, Banking Circle itself is the tech product, being a fintech. So the teams are grouped into features for this product, and then you have a central organization where you're sitting at that takes care of the overall infrastructure and cloud platform.
You could say what we do in technology operations, and in particular in cloud engineering, is an internal product. At least I like to think of it as that, and work from that idea that we are providing that product to the rest of the organization, right? And then the rest is split. In some cases, they are different products altogether. In some other cases, and especially for bigger products, then yes, it's split in features of that product in different teams, because some products are, yes, I guess, too big for a single team.
Right. And then you mentioned the way you describe it, there's a lot of diversity in the teams. And with diversity always comes, the need for an operational consistency.
Yeah.
So in your case, let's say when you joined Banking Circle, how did infrastructure and operations look like? So for example, if I'm a team that wants to build something new on the cloud, how did it look like before when you joined?
Yeah, so when I joined Banking Circle, like I say, in the year 2021, right? So that's 4 years ago. And back then, we were not even half of the people that we are now, because we've been growing a lot, but we were almost or more than twice as many people as they were maybe a year and a half or 2 years before that. So that whole growing very fast led to some anti-patterns, because when they were very few people, right, there was essentially one person or a couple of people that knew how to do all things related with infrastructure, right? They were the operations guys, right? And then the developers would do their thing, and when they were ready, they would tell them, well, deploy this. And if there was any issue with that, immediately they would go back and say, well, this didn't work, please fix it. Developer would fix it, and it would work like that. Which is a way of working that when you're not a lot of people, it kind of works, but as you scale, then it becomes harder and harder and harder, right? So like you say, when I joined, it was at a point where we kind of got to this silo situation, where there was operations on one side, developers on the other one, and different developer teams had to get access to the same operations. I want to say team, but realistically it was a person, right? So, for example, when I joined the team that I joined building the API, I had to work with infrastructure. I had to essentially provision a new environment so that the clients could use that as their sandbox environment to do some tests and whatnot. And I didn't know what an environment was in the context of Banking Circle or how to build it. So I, of course, had to ask the person that had been doing that until then. I joined the company on a Monday, and this person was only available on Friday that week. And the guy was good at what he was doing, but he was just like, everybody was reaching out to him because it had led to that situation where it was like, well, he is doing this thing, right? Of course, when there was any incident, any deployment that needed a bit of assistance, everything was going through that, right? So after I joined within my team, I could take a bit of that. And then what I also tried to put in place is a code-first mentality, because a lot of these actions had been done using the Azure portal or using some scripting, but it was hard to reproduce them. And especially if you had to do something similar for a different team, you kind of had to start from scratch again. So I was working on just doing some Terraform, infrastructure as code, getting that ready so that it can be deployed again and again. That worked fine. And then essentially in the team that I was in, I could take care of that. And we kind of got a bit of independence from this guy, who also got time to work on other things, right? Then this approach evolved into structuring it in modules, reusable components that other people, could take. And that was good because then everybody else was seeing the benefits of like not having to depend on one person, right? Being able to own their code and yes, sort of deploy when they wanted to. So that was a very nice step. But as time went by, the problem is that solution was based on the idea of building blocks, right? So you would have Terraform modules, you would have pipeline templates, you would have, all of these components that you would have to put together yourself and then run with that. And that didn't really work because they wanted the benefit of that, but it was not their main concern or domain of expertise to build those constructions out of the building blocks. So then we ran into some situations where we had to support that. Fortunately, I also got like some help at that point. It was not just me doing those modules, but like we had to help those people. And then they were complaining. And then there was this bit of tension, right? Mm-hmm. So where originally we had done something good with like going away from a dependency on a single person and going away from doing things like, clicking around and based on tacit knowledge in many cases, we had created another problem because then the people were like, well, that's infrastructure. It was never my thing. Why is my thing now? And then from my point of view or like the people that were working with me, we were like, well, but you see, it's easy now. And sure, it was easy for us that we're working every day with that, right? But for a developer where the core expertise was, again, .NET or Java or Python or whatnot, it was not always so easy.
So it sounds like that you kind of use these building blocks as a way to possibly empower the engineers to do more themselves. But then you kind of, if I understand it correctly, it sounds like you kind of ran into a roadblock a little bit where that expertise wasn't really something that the developers had. So they'd have to learn these new things in order to actually utilize these building blocks. Is that correct? Or
yeah. That's kind of what happened. But then also, even when we could sort of work with them, teach them, right? We, of course, the first thing we tried was like, okay, it's new. I understand that you have to, learn this new thing, but I'm going to tell you how it works.
Yeah.
And we would sit with people and, build a Terraform project with them based on our modules, be with them, deploy that. That would work. But the thing is, in some cases, these people then went on to do something else. And as a developer or anyone working in engineering or in tech, you are learning all the time. There's new things all the time, right? So then if you have to go back to that Terraform project, even if you are, good with it, you have learned it, right? But you don't touch it for 3 months.
Or so it became almost like a one-off thing where teach them, try to enable them to do it themselves. But then as they only use it once and maybe every 3 months, then you kind of get away from it and maybe have to relearn it a little bit or spend extra time on getting into how was it that this Terraform project was structured.
Yeah. So we had shifted the bottleneck a bit from like, the guy that was doing everything before, in a way was us now. But we had become that in a better way because we had automation, we had code, it was repeatable, but we kind of became, the bottleneck for a lot of changes and that wasn't good.
Yeah. So how did you deal with that then? This new, coming into it from, I guess, from a DevOps perspective, you create building blocks and enable teams to do more, but then you kind of hit the roadblock a little bit with that it didn't maybe have the desired effect.
Yeah.
So where did you go from there?
Yeah, so at the time, we also had some changes in the company, and personally, I also moved departments because, like I say, I was first in this team that was building an API, but what I was doing at some point was, and together with other people in the team, we were building these modules that other people were using, so we were kind of doing already that whole providing services to other people. There was also at the time a DevOps team that was being set, and then at some point we decided that it was a better fit for us to be there. And then once that we were in the DevOps team, we also back then, I think that's maybe a bit after I read team topologies, but it's around the time that I read team topologies. And I was like, well, this makes so much sense, right? Yeah. Now what I have to do is not so much automate or code, is like defining this boundary, right? Defining this product, really, that then other people can use. Yeah. And also at that time, and because of this whole move, we started looking into Kubernetes. We weren't doing Kubernetes before. So when we started building Kubernetes, first we had this whole idea of like, okay, it's a new platform. So we also have the chance of thinking how we want to do this. And then as we were building that, we also had in mind this very recent then of like the whole building blocks. And we were like, well, we cannot do this, right? We need to do something that it's easier to use, that people want to use, right? And based on that, team topologies and all of this, what we came up with was an approach based on interfaces instead of putting building blocks together. So the idea is that as a developer that needs something, in this case from the Kubernetes platform, but later we also expanded the approach to essentially provisioning any infrastructure. You are looking at one file, YAML files in our case, and then you kind of have to fill the details for what you want. So you would tell us, okay, this is the name of my team, this is where I have my code, this is the people in the team that therefore need access to the resources and whatnot. And then that's mostly about it. In the case of if you want to provision infrastructure, we also had some sections where you can say, well, I also want a storage account with this name or a key vault with that name. And it's a learning journey because, of course, that puts a lot on us. And therefore, there are more things that we can break. And sometimes if we break an integration that then other people are using, then we are disrupting a lot of people. But at the same time, that's because you have that, then you tend to not break that or to put all of the tests in place and all the controls so that you really only release things when it's safe to do that and whatnot. So this whole idea, I think, has taken us to a situation where just the general vibe between what we do, the providing services or the team that is providing services or product now, and the developers using those. Yeah, just the vibe around it, the type of conversations that we are having, they're so much friendlier, really. Yeah.
So this YAML file that you mentioned, it's like an order sleeve, like a desired state configuration. This is what I want. This is what I need. And then you provide that product and that service. But how do you educate the teams about what can they actually do with the product?
Yeah.
To what extent?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because in many of the things that we do, or essentially everything that we do as an internal product provider, right? If no one uses that, then it's useless. And we can build the best thing and the perfect interface, but if no one is using that, then it's useless. So we're doing several things. First of all, and especially when we have to do bigger changes, we are working with the users of that platform, right? So if we have to redesign anything, any major changes, then we ask around, tell people, hey, we're thinking in doing this way. Do you think it makes sense? Maybe this functionality, that one. And because we have that conversation going, oftentimes it's not even us that have to ask. It's someone that reaches out to us and they are like, hey, you're allowing me to do this that way, but not that way. Should we also include that? And something else that we're doing that is working incredibly well is doing internal demos. And so every second week, we actually had one earlier today, we have a demo where the cloud engineering team, we used to be called DevOps team, now we are cloud engineering. We show something that we have built to the rest of the engineers in the company, or really to anyone that wants to join. So there's sometimes other people that are not engineers per se. They may be working in product or even in finance, but if they have an interest and they want to attend like a 25, 30 minutes demo, they also do. And in those ones, it's not so much that we are focused in telling people, yeah, I have done this, I have done that, like kind of showing that, but rather it's really the moment where we sell in a way, right? Because people have to buy our product, okay, maybe not with money, but with time and with priority in their backlog because they have to do other things, right? So in those demos, we kind of think, okay, what is something that we have built that people would like to listen to? And then we do this whole showing how to use everything that we build, showing the possibilities, and in that way, educating people into how you can do this or that. Of course, that doesn't replace the need of having proper documentation. That doesn't replace the need of talking with people when they actually try something for the first time and then they don't understand something or there is a bug or whatnot. We also have to do a lot of that. But this whole knowing that every second week we're going to tell them something, we show them, I think is working very well because it also keeps us present, right? The developers, they might be using already something that we provide, but then they know that we're still there. So whenever they are just, even unconsciously, right, like thinking like, yeah, I could do this and that way, maybe they will think, okay, what if there's something that we already have here? So that's working very well. And something else that we are doing is we have all of the support requests from the people. We used to have a problem where many of us would get direct messages asking for support, right? And I think that this is probably a situation happening in other places, right? Like people are like, hey, Juan, I've seen that you have built this. I've seen that you have done the demo. Can you help me with this and that? But then the problem is like, okay, I have to switch my attention to that. And then maybe my colleague sitting next to me, then she is talking with someone else. And then another colleague is talking with someone else, right? Plus that knowledge only stays in each of us. So then we build this centralized communication channel where anyone can sort of like publish a post. It's really like a Teams channel. It's nothing fancy, right? But if you need any help, you just put a post there and then everyone can read it. And that also allows us to sort of distribute that support duty. And again, that keeps us responsive. So in a way, we are always talking to the people through these demos and we are always listening to them through this sort of single support channel. And with that, of course, there are always things that we can improve, right? But that's working pretty well for us.
Yeah. Did you use these demos as a way to drive adoption as well? Or did you have to do other things as well to get the teams to start using this new platform?
Yeah. We use the demos as a way of building awareness, first and foremost, right? But if people know that you have something and through the demo you're able to convey the message, this is good for you because this is what is in it for you, right? In the demo, we always try to have this perspective, not so much in talking about the technicalities of what we have done, why it's cool for us because maybe we have used that or that technology, but rather why it's cool for them, right? We're telling them like, this is making your life easier in this way, and that way. And then if they know that it exists and they know and understand why it's easier for them, that kind of naturally leads to adoption. Together with knowing that when they get to that, then we will be there also supporting. That gets us a lot of the way through. Then, of course, especially when we have migrations and stuff like that, and that's always a painful moment, right? Because then it's like, well, we were doing things this way. Now we have this new way. Please switch, because I don't want to be maintaining that one for too long, right? And then you have, I don't know, 70, 80% of the people moving in like a fairly quick time. But then there's always someone that maybe they don't rely as heavily or they don't want to touch it that much or they are just working on something else, right? So sometimes we still have to be the ones initiating that conversation and kind of pushing a bit people to adopt some of the things that we have done. But more and more, and I think because of that, telling them what we do, being there for them when they need us, and also trying to build what makes sense, right? Like I say, we also talk with people, especially when we're building something big, we sort of reach out and we're like, okay, is this something that you think makes sense or not? I think that naturally leads to adoption.
Yeah.
Yeah.
was that I'm just curious, when you introduced Kubernetes as a way of deploying infrastructure within your company, how that was received? Because I mean, in the community, we hear a lot of stories around Kubernetes, and there's a steep learning curve. So I could imagine if it's just introduced, saying now we're using Kubernetes as a way to deploy your web applications, that people might be a bit hesitant or reluctant to start using it or adopting it because they know, I've heard that Kubernetes is maybe a little bit of a beast.
Yeah.
So how was that perceived and perceived in the company?
With a lot of reluctance,
Yeah.
and fear to some extent, right? Because people were like, "Hey, what we have works, right? Why do I have to learn this new thing? Why do we have to do that?" Which is also a very fair question to ask. So we even had some comments along the lines of like, "Hey, I had just hired a colleague, and he has told me that they were doing Kubernetes in his previous organization, and that's why he switched. So don't bring that here too." Yeah, I literally had
That is drama.
and then, like I say, it was also a journey for us to discover how to expose that, right? Because most of the cases, our developers don't care. It could be Kubernetes, it could be any cloud provider services, it could be whatever. They want to do their code, deploy it, and something telling them like, is it working or not? And if it's not, where are the logs? How can they troubleshoot? And all of that. And then you have a few developers that actually are quite passionate about Kubernetes or generally this area. And then they are the ones that are like, oh yeah, but can you tell me how that works? Or can I sort of like do my own changes? And then instead of using the abstraction that you are providing, can I sort of like have my own fork or do this or that? And it's a bit tricky to find the right abstraction level because that is different for many different developers, right? So at some point you can try to set that where you cover, again, 80% of the people, right? Okay, most people are just going to use this. They are just going to provide us that YAML file, those inputs, run with it. And we need to give those people an easy time. We need to clearly let them know, is this running or not? And if it's not, then they need access to the whole observability suite to see if things are working or not. And I think that's by far the most important thing, right? So those people, at this point, of course, they know we are doing Kubernetes because we've also been very, very vocal about it, but they don't have to know Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Right? We have built it like that. But we have also built it in a way where you can opt out of certain aspects of the platform, or you can build on top, or you can sort of build your alternative to certain layers of this platform. And then we have a few people using those. And the risk with that, of course, is that then you go back to the situation where everyone is doing their own thing and you don't know how to support that. So what we're doing there is like, just trying to be honest, right? Saying like, look, you can do your own thing, but if I don't know how you're doing that, then when it breaks, I can try to help and I will try to help, but no guarantees. And generally people are fine with that, because then if they are not comfortable kind of doing that themselves, then they are like, okay, then I'll just do, the vanilla version.
That's
Yeah, but it's been a journey also of convincing people. And we also had a bit of a mixed approach of like reaching out to people sort of like bottom up, telling everyone like, yeah, this is coming, this is good, again, because this and that, join our demos, we'll show you, while at the same time talking to like the CTO back then, talking with also people in business and in product that effectively had to prioritize whether to migrate or not, right? And also selling the advantage, or I'm not sure if selling is the right word here, but explaining why this is a good idea to all of them. So there's definitely been a lot of explaining, a lot of talking with people really, and trying to get to the point which makes sense.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now you've mentioned a lot of different skills, right? When you got into platform engineering and bringing that as a product, you talked sales, talking to, the C-levels, and then customer support, talking to users, but then you're still inherently an engineer. You're still the one building the platform. And I think a lot of our listeners here are also engineer transitioning into, being platform engineers and very used to just keeping the lights on, and then suddenly they have to switch hats and think about users and customers and relationships and having a friendly conversation. How do you do all these things? I mean,
Yeah, I don't know if there was a playbook that I followed or anything like that. There's a lot of it that it's trial and error. I used to have a vision when we're doing these building blocks, for example, right? I remember being frustrated and like voicing these concerns in the sense of like, hey, I have built these modules. Now you can do this, right? You just, and this is a tricky case, right? If you just have to put them together, why don't you do that? Right? So it was a journey for me to like also become a better listener, I guess, right? I am in other aspects of my life, I'm also very much into improv comedy. And a lot of that is listening to what is happening and then, acting based on that. So I think that by becoming a better listener, then you did develop all of these of like, oh, okay. I have this frustration, but hold on, what's yours? Yeah, it doesn't have to do with what you're building, or it's too complex, or it doesn't make sense, or okay, then let me do something else, right? And it's also very rewarding when you do it right. So I think that naturally you kind of, when it comes to dealing with people and whatnot, it's like, okay, if you don't do it right, you very clearly see that you're not doing it right. And you might get frustrated, you might, complain and whatnot, but that's not really getting you anywhere. Whereas if you try to work with people and then it's like, okay, I see what is happening here, then most of the time that gets you somewhere, because then you take those concerns into account, you build something better, that's better probably for the person that you're working with, but maybe also for someone else, and so on and so forth. And then when it comes to sales or talking to executives, in my case, I think it's just been a bit of the same. Being there, kind of having to do it, also not doing it alone, of course. I've had a lot of support throughout this with like all the people that I've been working with. I'm also super happy with the team that I have now, the people that we are building the platform, because that also allows you to, maybe some days you're not at your best, but someone else is. So yeah, if any playbook, I think I mentioned already Team Topologies. I really like that book when I read it. I've since then been a bit more reading and listening about platform engineering. It has also become so much bigger since then, for instance, platform as a product, a strategy around that and whatnot. So I've been, reading, listening, watching around the topic, and I guess that some of that sticks, but I don't think I have a particular strategy or playbook that I've been following.
What about, say, the complexity of taking in something like Kubernetes? I can imagine there's a lot of companies out there that are looking into a similar journey of adopting Kubernetes as a way maybe to having a consistent infrastructure, as an easy way for developers to deploy their workloads. But there's a lot of complexities in getting that to work in a nice way in a company, and especially around the developer experience of using something like Kubernetes. So how do you approach that from your perspective in reducing the complexity of such a big thing as Kubernetes, so that it's easy for the developers to work with and get started and deploy their workloads?
Yeah, it has a bit of a learning curve. That's definitely the case. So I think if there is no knowledge at the time in a company trying to adopt Kubernetes, then there has to be time to learn, right? Because anyone can learn, and it's very exciting. Not only Kubernetes itself, but all the technologies around it, everything cloud native. It's a super cool space, but there's a lot of things, right? There's this famous or infamous CNCF tools panel, which at this point has 200 and something different tools. Each of those, it's a learning journey in itself, right? So anyone can learn, if they have the motivation and if they have the time, right? So I think if a company is wanting to do that and they don't have anyone that already knows how to do that or that is comfortable enough, then they need to get those people a safe environment where they can make mistakes, right? You try something, again, you would build it with some developers, hopefully, so that you can also try to figure out this other part of the job about talking with people, about selling, about how to build something that is appealing. But it's gonna take time if you have never done that, because there's a lot to it, and even just with Kubernetes, there's just a lot in that space, right? So you can always get experience from outside. You can hire people. You can get consultants on the matter, or of course it can also be a mix, right? You can also build that knowledge into the company, learn as you build it. That's also a lot of what I personally have been through. I have not done a Kubernetes platform elsewhere. I have just built this one in Banking Circle. And now I know much more than I knew 4 years ago. But that's also because I have been through that and because I had the time where I've been, building it and where I could break things and there was nothing critical relying on it. Now there is.
Yep.
And now it's not only me. Now we have a team and we know how to support it. And if something breaks, then, we can react to it. But that takes time.
Yeah. And what's next in your platform engineering journey?
Yeah, so we have this single interface or YAML-based approach, right? And what we want to do is to turn that into essentially Kubernetes manifest, into custom resources, right? So that you would just put these files into a repo, and then you have an operator running that just picks it from there and in cluster runs everything it needs. Because right now what we are seeing is that the general experience with working with these files is fine, but then it still takes just a bit of time to sort of execute the changes or to ensure that our source of truth is reflected into the cluster, into the actual applications that are deployed. So we want to close that loop, which is also positive in terms of developer experience, because if you break something or if you are introducing a change that is going to break something, then you want to break it as soon as possible. Then then you fix it, right? And we believe the way of doing that can be through, some operators that essentially is consuming these YAML files and is immediately doing whatever needs to be done, as opposed to running through a pipeline workflow. We're also expanding the approach well beyond Kubernetes. So we have it for the Kubernetes platform, but like I said, we also have it for provisioning infrastructure. We also use it for observability. We have a messaging platform where people can have their own topics and then different applications communicate through those. And all of those now are based on this idea of like, okay, it's one YAML file and you define here what you need. So I think in all of those, we have a lot to gain if we shorten that loop. Plus, if we manage to do that through an operator, then you don't rely on pipelines, which also means you can run something like that on your own machine, which means the cycle is shorter. But if you do it in your own machine, yes, the inner cycle is even shorter because you can immediately see, well, this is going to fail or not. So that's mainly it. We might also look into UIs at some point. Right now, we don't have anything fancy on top of these YAML files. So that's also an improvement that at some point we might look into, because most people are comfortable, writing YAML and providing us that input. But for some people, still having just a nice visual experience is important. So so we'll work on that. And then, like I say, we have observability and we have compute platforms and we have messaging platforms, and they kind of make a platform, all of them combined. But that is not always super obvious in some of the aspects that we do. So we also have some work to do in bringing that into a truly cohesive offering. We're okay, but we can be better at that.
Okay. And will that be the same team taking care of all these platforms, or that's still...
Yeah.
Okay.
That will be our team, yeah.
Interesting. Well, obviously, I can hear there's a lot of ongoing transformation in your organization. It's probably never going to end. So do you have any specific success metrics that you're measuring, like to get a buy-in from the business? If they ask, okay, why are we changing the way we're doing things again? Is that just productivity, or is this a top-down approach coming from from the executive saying we all do this, or is it more coming from the engineering?
Well, from the business side, we are measuring, of course, uptime. We have some SLOs on different systems. So there you can clearly see, well, our availability this month has been this much. We are also measuring deployments, and with that, we can know, well, you're deploying this frequently and you're failing this much of the time, right? And of course, we have incidents, and we can count how many of those we have and how long they stay open, how long they are in incident for. So all of those are metrics that you can sort of look at and see whether they are going up or down. And then actually something that we don't have numbers on, we have numbers on adoption, of course. We can see how many of the teams are using our platforms. And then in terms of customer satisfaction, We don't really have numbers yet. We've actually been talking about whether to do service or not, but we've always been at this point where the company didn't feel like sort of big enough to do that, because we are still at a point where we can talk to everyone or to most people. So then when we try to measure if people are happy or not, or if we are building the right thing or not, we kind of do that through a vibe feeling, right? Like, yes, talking with them when they are joining our demos or writing to us in the support channel or whatnot. Like, you kind of see if people are happy or not. And right now it feels like it's quite all right. But we don't have numbers on that. So at some point, maybe that's another metric to add to them.
All right. And something that we always ask about is to provide a shortcut. So with the journey that you've been through and all the things that you know today, if you had to take a similar journey today, is there a shortcut that you would take?
Yeah, I think the important thing here is to see maybe sympathy here, right? See with the eyes of other people, because all of these things that you're building them for other people, and they need to make sense for them. Of course, it's also super important that you understand the technical aspect of it and that they are reliable, that they don't break. But people need to use your thing, and hopefully they do that because they want to, not because they have to.
Yeah.
And for that to make sense, you have to talk with them, understand what they do and how they do it to some extent. And I think that as time has been going by, we're doing more and more of that. And I think having done also more and more of that years ago would have saved us a lot of time and would have probably helped us build the right things before. So that would be my shortcut.
All right. Thanks for that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Really enjoyed hearing your story and your journey. Very interesting.
And I love your shortcut. Yeah. That's a wrap for today's episode of Shortcut. If you enjoyed our discussion, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite platform. Sign up for our Shortcut newsletter at our website, Shortcu.tt, and receive our latest podcast straight to your inbox. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, and keep discovering shortcuts to engineering great products.